Bonjour à tous, ici Paul Ponceau pour Au-delà de l'illusion. Et aujourd'hui, j'ai le plaisir d'accueillir de nouveau Jerry Marzinski et Anon Imus, qui, comme son nom l'indique, souhaitent garder l'anonymat. Anonymous a un témoignage extrêmement intéressant à donner. Anonymous a été littéralement harcelé par ce qu'on peut appeler les pensées intrusives, le phénomène des voix. Et il a réussi à s'en sortir. Et c'est son témoignage qui est extrêmement important parce qu'il montre que le phénomène des voix, qui est lié à la possession partielle, voire à un début de possession totale par les entités sans âme de type démon, djinn ou archonte, est quelque chose qui est réversible. C'est quelque chose qui est réversible si vraiment on se donne les moyens d'inverser la situation. Parce qu'il faut bien comprendre que les voix, les entités derrière les voix, ont peut-être de la technologie, mais ne sont pas plus fortes que nous. Pourquoi? Parce que nous, on possède une âme et une conscience. Et je pense que ce sont ces deux aspects qui font que on est plus fort que ces entités, mais très souvent, on a oublié ce paramètre parce qu'on possède une âme et une conscience. Cette interview est en anglais. Hello all of you, and this is Paul Ponsard for a new episode of Au-delà de l'illusion, Beyond the Illusion. And today, the episode is a new interview of Jerry Marzinski, who we heard a few weeks ago. Now, Jerry Marzinski today will be introducing Anon, who, as his name indicates, wants to remain anonymous. Anon has a very, very important testimony to tell. Anon was plagued by the non-human entities, by the intrusive thoughts phenomenon, but he managed to actually get rid of them. And his testimony is extremely important. It shows that the intrusive voice phenomenon, which is linked to demonic possession, at least partial demonic possession, and even in some cases total demonic possession, total possession by non-human entities, is reversible if we manage to take our power back, because those entities might have technology, they might have powers that we don't have, but we have something they don't have, and that something is consciousness and the human spirit. So without further ado, Jerry Marzinski, could you introduce Anon?
Well, in 1 second, I just kind of want to give some background information. I want your listeners to know that the psychiatric mafia is lying to you about what the voices are. They say they're hallucinations. Now, I've been working with schizophrenics in a number of different settings for over 40 years now, and those voices are not hallucinations. You know, they run very specific, repeatable patterns. And hallucinations don't do that. They're random. Okay, and Anon can talk about some of those patterns later. Now, these voices are energetic entities. They're as John Mace says, they come from the energetic universe. They don't play by the same rules that the physical universe operates by. Where they are, there is no time, there is no space, and there is no matter. So they can hit the patient anywhere, you know. And they are energetic parasites. So they feed off of the negative emotional energy that they generate in their victim. Okay. Now there's when a patient first gets hit with the voices, the first thing they try to do is figure out what these things are. You know, what are they? Where do they come from? What are they doing? You know, what's going on? And they will come to one of three decisions. Is one, they'll believe the psychiatric mafia, that these things are due to a chemical imbalance in their brain, and that there's nothing they can do about it except take the toxic psychiatric medications that the psychiatric mafia is dishing out. Right? These things are not hallucinations, and they have no proof that they are. They're just basically arrogantly announcing, since they don't have any idea what they are and they've done no research into it, that these are hallucinations. They have no other explanation for it. They haven't done any research to back that. They just arrogantly declare that, and the psychiatrists write it down as schizophrenia or psychosis, and then the drug companies come up behind them and develop all these drugs that basically, tranquilize the brain. They don't get rid of the voices. It would be akin to dumping antipsychotics on a magnetic field. They will clog up the brain, they'll weaken the voices, but they won't get rid of them. Okay, so the people who believe the psychiatric mafia, that these things are hallucinations, there's nothing you can do about it, that other than take their poisonous medicines, they're going to be the worst off. And look what they've done when they announced that these things are hallucinations. Who's going to investigate a hallucination? Who in academia is going to do research on a hallucination? It's like a waste of time. So they've knocked out anybody who disagrees with them. So again, the ones who believe the psychiatric mafia, that these are hallucinations due to a chemical brain imbalance or some kind of genetic disorder, for which they have absolutely no proof. As a matter of fact, those two have been disproved. They're going to be in the worst possible shape. The next group that's going to be in a halfway decent shape are the ones that don't know what they are. They're not sure whether they're hallucinations. They're not sure whether they're a chemical imbalance. At least they're on the fence. The ones who are going to be the best off are the ones like Anon here, who realizes that these things are not who he is. They don't belong to him, and he kept an arm's length from them. Okay, and Anon recovered on his own, and I know several other people who kept these things at arm's length and kind of watched them and tried to reason what was going on, and came to the conclusion that these voices are not who they are. They're the ones who are listening to them. And one of the big misconceptions that is put out by the establishment is that you are your thoughts. You're not your thoughts. You're the one who listens to them. And the schizophrenics are not their voices. They're the ones who are listening to the voices. They are not the voices. Okay.
Because I wanted to ask you, Jerry, about the thought process. If I'm correct, there's never been any scientific explanation given for thought, and I'm talking about even ordinary thoughts. There's no scientific explanation as such.
No, they don't know what thought is. They don't know what the mind is. The thought is energy also, and these voices are energetic beings also. So what they can do is they can have complete access to the patient's mind. They can go in there and they can pull up all the crap that has been buried there, because thought is energy. Thought is a form of energy. These things are a form of energy. They can go in there, they can pull up all the crap that you got buried, and they can trigger it and generate that negative emotional energy on which they feed. Now these drugs that the psychiatrists give just dumb down the brain, so they kind of slow the process. They don't, for the most part, they don't get rid of the voices, and the few times they do, when the person goes off those tranquilizers, the voices return with a vengeance. So it's akin to pouring antipsychotics on a magnetic field. It dumbs down the brain, but it doesn't get rid of the voices. And until they wake up and realize that these things are energetic entities that don't belong to the physical world, they're never going to have a cure for schizophrenia, because they're barking up the wrong tree. So from here, I'll turn it over to Anon, and I'll just jump in from time to time and kind of point out where you see the patterns, Anon. That's important. The one thing that is going to destroy the psychiatric mafia's bullcrap is that the fact that these things run specific repeatable patterns over and over again, and hallucinations do not.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Paul, for inviting me to be on your show. And
You're welcome.
I'm hoping that the telling my story will help your listening audience, and will also help if your listening audience knows anybody who's going through some of these episodes to understand there's more to it than just mere hallucinations. There's something real to this. So I guess what I'll do is I'll briefly go into a little bit of my family background and history, and then I'll get more focused onto the actual experiences I had with these entities, as I call them. So I've always been a very kind of a spiritual religious person. I kind of followed the Christianity, the Christian path, in the sense of just being a good person, being a good human being. I didn't get so much into the dogma of it or anything like that. So I was actually baptized Greek Orthodox. I've attended Methodist churches. I was actually in a Catholic youth group in high school, even though I wasn't Catholic. And then when I went off to college, I really didn't go to church that much when I was in college. But these attacks occurred after I graduated college. That would have been about 1989 when a lot of things started happening. So going back to my family, I came from a dysfunctional family. Wasn't the worst dysfunctional out there, but it wasn't the best either. There was a lot of death occurring in my family. I lost my grandfather. My father died in my arms. I lost my other grandfather, probably in all 4 or 5 year period. My older sister decided to have an affair with a married high school teacher, so that created a lot of chaos in the household at the time. My dad was old school European, and my mom came from Canada. My older sister she was kind of ostracized from the household, so she had to leave, and I was probably about 7 or 8 years old at the time, and my parents didn't tell me what was going on, so I thought that she had died. And my older brother, in the meantime, was kind of taking advantage of the situation. He was very much getting into drugs. He was a drug dealer, emotionally abusive, probably physically abusive at times as well. So I've since learned about that word narcissism. I would definitely say that my older brother and older sister both were beyond the threshold of having narcissistic personalities. I would say my brother's approach was more about hatred, envy, jealousy, where my sister's approach was more protective and love. But it was still that kind of narcissistic bandwidth where you're dealing with certain personality types. And for those out there who know what I'm talking about as far as narcissistic personality disorders, you know what it's like when you're around them. They definitely smothered who you are and your personality. So my brother was kind of, he thought it was funny to get little kids stoned. So when I was about 5 or 6, 7 years old, he would push drugs on me, marijuana most of the time. Sometimes I would smoke it, sometimes I did not. Part of me was saying to be aware of these drugs, but don't get hooked into it. And the scientist inside of me wanted my mind for future use. So even though I was around all these drugs growing up, I pretty much avoided them for the most part. I mean, yeah, did I smoke a little marijuana now and then? I would have to say yes, I did. Did I use it profusely or anything like that? No. It was infrequent use in high school and even college, very infrequent use. But I remember my father had died. He passed away in my arms when I was 13 years old. And my brother had made all these promises about how he would help out around the family and everything. And I knew he was just doing his pathological lying again. I mean, 2 weeks later, he came all drugged out, couldn't even say his name, stumbling and slurring his words. And I had to hide him in the garage for my mother, because I felt my mom could not handle it right now because she was in a state of depression, having just lost her husband. There were many times my brother would ask me if I wanted to have a drug dealership to deal some cocaine and marijuana when I was in high school. I said no to it, even though I didn't have much money at all. I mean, this was the 80s. There's a lot of money going around. Quite often my sneakers had holes in them because we just couldn't afford to get new sneakers at a certain point. My mom had to go back to work after my dad passed away. She had to improve her educational skills. So needless to say, there's a lot of turmoil and chaos going on in my family growing up. A lot of codependency. I kind of became the rescuer or the caregiver, trying to fix everything in the household, trying to keep the household going. I took on my father's role, in a sense, to keep the household going. And my brother was about 8 or 9 years older than me. So at 13, I kind of became the adult. My older brother was 19 or 20 at the time, and he was still kind of the child, having not properly emotionally matured because of probably the drugs he did. And I'm sure there was a psychological aspects going on in his head as well. I remember seeing bags of cocaine all over the place. I was offered it many times to snort it, and I was probably about 10 or 12 years old at the time. I never actually did a line of coke. I did put a little bit on my gum one time just to see what it tasted like. And I remember it had a very kind of a sodium baking soda chemical taste to it. And the scientist inside of me said, who would want to snort this stuff up their nose? So that kind of prevented me from ever getting involved in the cocaine. I just felt like I saw how it was kind of ruining people's lives around me. I remember seeing bags of pills on various tables and countertops. I held a brick of hash in my hand when I was probably 10 years old. I smoked a little hash when I was younger too. And there were times my brother wanted me to go get high with him, and sometimes I would give in to his persuasions. Other times I would say no and resist. But when I resisted, quite often, he got angry with me on that. There was one story I remember in particular where he wanted to go down the trails and get stoned. And I said no. There was a higher voice in my head saying, don't go, don't go. He came back from the trails with limping, and the motorcycle that I would have been riding on the back on was all smashed up. And as he's walking by me, I remember he yelled at me, you little, and he said all sorts of curse words at me. He said, if this hadn't happened, if you'd come with me, this wouldn't have happened. I would not have wiped down the motorcycle. Well, if I went with him, I would have been dead, knowing what his state of mind was. So a lot of emotional abuse going on in the household.
Yeah, and what I'd like to cap that off with is that there is a one-to-one correspondence between schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, and this kind of abuse, which is why it's critical for us to get a hold of this pedophile crap going on all over the place right now. That has to be stopped, because it will result in mental illness. I mean, here's the pharmaceutical industry blaming, everything except the emotional abuse on schizophrenia. But, there's a one-to-one correspondence, as Anon is saying here. This is widespread. It isn't just for a particular case. Every schizophrenic I've talked to virtually had a nightmare of abuse earlier.
Oh, definitely. These entities.
Absolutely.
These entities that schizophrenics face, if that's the correct term to call them, they're like bullies. And
the voices you're talking about now.
Yeah, the voices. And that's the thing about a bully. If you remember the bullies you grew up in school, they could hone in on those that were most vulnerable or had been victims in their own households. Because there's a sensitivity, I think, that bullies have to who's a victim, and they go after them. These entities or voices are the same way. They will focus on those that have damaged psyches because they're easy targets, I should say.
That's right. Anon, what would you say if one of these highfalutin psychiatrists came up to you and said, you're whacked out, these are hallucinations? What would you respond to them? See, and they have, the interesting thing is they haven't ever experienced these things. And I doubt seriously if any of them have ever taken any of the meds that they dish out. So if a psychiatrist says, hey, you're whacked out, these are hallucinations, we know better than you do, what would you say to them?
I would tell them, look, hey, if you really want to help your patient, you need to pull in both shaman, priest, and psychiatrist, psychologist to help them work through this. This is a spiritual battle. This is not something inside the head. This is something coming in from the outside and going after their targets, I call it. I view the brain as a receiver.
Yeah.
There's a whole realm of thought and consciousness out there that we don't really know, and you can't measure it because it's not material. It is a form of energy, just we don't have the instrumentations to actually measure it.
You just can see the effect.
So you have to look at your brain, the actual physical gray matter, as being almost like a radio tuner receiver.
Right.
It can transmit, it can receive, it can act as a filter to keep things out, it can act as a tuner or bandwidth to open up to certain things. And that's what these entities, I will call them, kind of go after. They see their target and they hone in on them. So going back a little bit to my story, so when I went through a dysfunctional environment growing up.
And you think, George, that the dysfunctional environment creates also negative emotional energy in the person that's victim of all that, or that's that's victim of all that, because that's what you have to say, and that emotional energy basically feeds those entities and attracts them.
Yeah. Did you ever feel your energy being sucked out of you while these things were attacking you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'd be exhausted afterwards. So I think what happened is there was a lot of my emotions were bottled up growing up in my teenage years, and I could never express myself because of the dysfunctionality going on. I could never speak up or have my own voice. So I tried to be a good person growing up. I mean, in school, I kept my grades up because I felt like that was the way out of the dysfunctional environment that I was growing up in. And I never got to really address some of the issues that were occurring. So when I graduated from college, that's when everything started opening it up. It was the first time that I had a chance to actually look into myself to see who I was, because I never got a chance to do that growing up. It's almost like I was in survival mode throughout my younger and teenage years, and even through college to get through it. So when I graduated college, which would have been, I guess, close to the mid-20s, when I was in 24, 25, 26, my mind started going through almost a series of iterations. Like, it wanted to know more about God, more about how the universe works, more about philosophy. So I graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering, and I probably minored in psychology. So I was aware of abnormal psychology and general psychology. I was aware of schizophrenia and DSM, the diagnostic manual. So when I started having these occurrences, I had at least a point of reference from the typical psychological viewpoints on it. But I'd have to say it was almost like a possession. I mean, it really was.
How did those occurrences, sorry to interrupt, but that's quite important in my view. Did those occurrences start slowly, or did they just start like that? Because a lot of people that are tormented by those entities say they just come on like that. 1 minute they're okay, the next minute they're being targeted by those entities. How did it start in your case?
Well, I think it probably started gradually, but built up and built up and built up, because I think they were getting frustrated with me because they weren't successful. So they kept changing their battle plans.
What were they trying to do?
Well, I always felt that I had a kind of a life mission to do what I could to improve the human condition, to kind of, I guess, follow in the footsteps of Christ, to just being a good person, doing what you can to help the world. And
they didn't like that?
They didn't like that. I mean, and what started happening was they kept telling me that I had failed in my mission, give it up, you're worthless. And it's almost like these entities were coming into me and taking over. Like, I was generally a good person growing up. Now, these entities,
they were battling for your attention.
They're battling for my attention, absolutely. And what happened is they kept telling me how worthless I was and everything. And
that's common. That's very common.
I started going in a little bit of a state of depression and everything. And so many things were going on at that point in time. It was like I was waking up to suppressed emotions. I was acknowledging finally what had occurred in my family situation and the dynamics there. I was having issues with my mother at the time too, some codependency that I was trying to break away from. So finally, I crashed, and that would have been, I guess, the tail end of August of 1990. I almost felt like I wasn't sleeping anymore, that I was almost like awake for a full week. Like I could close my eyes, but the mind was just going. There was so much stuff going on. I mean,
Yeah. And that's another pattern that happens. The voices don't want their victim to sleep, because if they can wear them down, they're more suggestible. So you'll find schizophrenics have a horrible time sleeping because the voices they get loudest about 3 in the morning, and they don't want the person sleeping.
So I finally crashed the end of August of 1990. I was committed to a psychiatric hospital, Princeton House, located in New Jersey. I was in the psychiatric hospital in Princeton House for the entire month of September of 1990, so about 4 full weeks.
And what was that like?
Well, it was part heaven and part hell. I mean, there were some people in there that were definitely trying to help me. I felt were looking out for my best interest. Others, not so, the other way. I remember that they were giving me all sorts of different drugs to try. I was like, you're like a guinea pig or a pincushion. They don't know which drugs are going to work to help you snap out of it. So they put me on this drug, on that drug, and I didn't know if I was coming or going sometimes.
Now let me point that thing out about that one. When I was working at the state hospital, I was taught in graduate school that this schizophrenia was a chemical imbalance, and that their drugs somehow temporarily balanced the brain. But what I saw was that they never gave any kind of test to find out what chemicals in the brain were out of balance or by how much. They just started prescribing medications, just like Anon said. It was like this big wheel. They take a pinwheel and throw it at the dartboard and went, hey, we'll start with this one. And then if that doesn't work, we'll try this, and then we'll try this, and then we'll try this. So it was this trial and error thing until they found one that the person could somewhat tolerate. But there is no test to determine. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain is. They have no idea, let alone any medicine that's balancing anything out. And they have no test to test for the chemical balance of the brain. None. And matter of fact, research has proven there is no chemical imbalance in the brain of schizophrenics, and there is no genetic abnormality. This is bullcrap that the psychiatric mafia and the pharmaceutical industry is feeding the population to line their own pockets.
I think so, and we can, and I think, if I may add, that it works like this. There's 1 or 2 psychiatrists that are basically linked to secret societies, that are linked to the system, to big pharma and all that, who will be giving their point of view, which is usually influenced by big pharma, without any scientific evidence, what schizophrenia is, what this or that mental illness is, and all the other psychiatrists, or most of the others, will just follow what they say without even checking for themselves. That's what I think.
Well, you're exactly right. And then they teach this bull crap in the medical schools, so they're brainwashed by the time they come out. Now these diagnoses, every single one of them, are made up by psychiatry, this board of psychiatrists that meets once every few years, and they vote these diagnoses in and they vote them out. There is no test for any of them. These are just made up by psychiatrists to describe a certain segment of behavior, because like Anon was saying, they can't measure thought. They can't measure non-physical energy, and that's what thought and that's what the voices are. So they blame it on something else, and then they're making $47 billion a year between psychiatry and big pharma, and selling their toxic drugs. And those drugs they're poisonous.
Well, you see it in France with big pharma in general. For example, in France, for the COVID scam, which ties up, in my opinion, with the big pharma scam, there's about 4 or 5 specialists who speak on the mainstream television. We don't know where they come from, what's their background or anything. They just speak for everybody, and that's the only voice you get. And it's the same way with psychiatry, just 4 or 5 people that speak for everybody. Everybody follows them. What they say is dogmatic, no place for alternative theories or anything.
Right. What I heard is 2/3 of those psychiatrists who make up these diagnoses are in league with Big Pharma. So what they do is make up the diagnosis, and then Big Pharma follows up behind with some kind of drug that they use to treat it with. You know, it's a massive scam that they put on the people, and you know, people are starting to wake up now.
Yeah, those drugs, I mean, for the short-term use, okay, I can see where it's valid, but definitely
Yeah.
not for the long-term use, because you're covering up the symptoms when you're putting them on the drugs, and you're not giving the patient the ability to really address the underlying causes. So for a short-term thing, taking them on and off in a safe environment, that I can understand. But yeah,
Yeah,
putting them on for years and years and years, forget it. That's
agree.
just going to just destroy the patient.
Yeah, but that's what they're after. They're saying, you know, schizophrenia is a life sentence, and you have to take these drugs for the rest of your life. That's what they're telling patients. So what did those drugs feel like when they gave those to? What was that like?
I did not like it. I mean, just sometimes you're out of it. Sometimes it can seem like time slowing down. I can remember phase shift. There's probably a couple of days when I was in the psychiatric hospital that I don't even remember. I just remember them telling me you got to take your pills and everything like that. They give you a little cup. They check under your tongue to make sure you swallowed it. They'd have to witness it. And one of the other things I remember is every time a doctor or nurse came in, they'd have their clipboard in. They were trying to figure out what was wrong with me. They kept asking what my name was, And I kept thinking, are these people idiots? Don't they have it on the clipboard? How can they keep forgetting what my name is? And then it finally dawned on me. They weren't asking me what my name was because they didn't know. They were asking me to see if I knew. And they kept doing that over and over again. I remember when I was in the hospital too, like I classify hallucinations in 3 different categories. One is audible hallucinations, where you're actually hearing a voice. The second one is very strong thoughts, where it's actually you're kind of the sound of your own voice, but it's very strong thought. It's not your typical thoughts. It's like something else is in there. And then there's the actual visual hallucinations, where you see something with your eyes. So prior to ending up in the psychiatric hospital, I was having, I would call the very strong thoughts, those type of hallucinations, where just beating me down, wearing me down, attacking me, telling me how worthless I am, what a loser I am, give it up.
And that's typical. That's a pattern.
Might as well kill
That
yourself.
happens to everybody who hears those voices. They're always negative. Now, what holds them in a negative pattern? You know, psychiatry never asks that, because they don't ask the person about the voices. They just go their hallucinations, just ignore them. But if you ignore them, they get louder. You know, so they won't delve into this energy level at all. You know, they're stuck in the physical, and they're missing the picture.
Now, when I was in the psychiatric hospital, I do remember there's about 2 or 3 nights where I did actually start having auditory hallucinations, where I was hearing voices. Now, I kind of, to deal with this, I kind of put myself in a split mind state. Part of me was dealing with all this. The other part of me stepped out to watch it, almost like a scientific observer.
That was your saving grace.
Because I had taken psychology, so I kind of knew a little bit about this stuff, but at the same time, I was curious about what was going on in my mind. So as Jerry said, that helped me to disassociate a little bit from it. But I remember hearing all these voices. It was a cacophony. And I would say it was men, women, children speaking and talking. I didn't take it that they were talking specifically to me, because I was in a split mind state. It was almost a good way of visualizing it is, you know, when you're in a movie theater or a play before the show's about to start and everybody's talking in the background. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it was. All these voices talking back and forth, back and forth. I don't know if they're talking about me. I don't know what they were saying. I really wasn't listening to them. I was just kind of saying, okay, this is just a kind of a dream state type of thing. But who knows? That they could have been talking about me. That they could have been trying to figure out ways to get at me or that sort of thing. But so
did they somehow open a channel between you and another dimension, or whatever you
that was definitely going on throughout this ordeal. And I said this probably started in maybe earlier mid 1989 and continued on for a couple or a few years there. But yeah, I was definitely tapping into something was opening up, a different realm that I was tapping into. And I have a very logical mind, so I didn't quite understand what was going on. I wasn't, you know, I'm not a priest out on a mountaintop in a monastery or anything like this. I went to school for an engineering and was trying to get into the workforce to establish my life, and this stuff started occurring. So I mean, I was my income, I think in 1991 was actually below poverty level at that point. I had some credit cards, so I was paying for any rent that I had to pay, and my health insurance off my credit cards with cash advances. I spent a few nights in a hotel. I was trying to get out of the dysfunctional environment that I was growing up in. I kept finding myself back there. So in the hospital, they finally, towards the end of their ordeal, I was going to be either none of the medications were working. It wasn't snapping me out of it. I mean, I was rock bottom. And as Jerry said, the DS manual, it classifies different aspects of the mind into different categories. And that's not how it works. You can be going through all these things at the same time. You could have manic, bipolar, depression, schizophrenia, all this stuff can be occurring at the same time. But I guess they try and categorize it by the most dominant one. Because there were times where I was seeing in black and white. I was probably so depressed. I could no longer taste food. I'm about 6'2", and I think I was down to less than 120 pounds because I felt like I wasn't worthy of eating. I wasn't deserving to eat. I mean, these are what the voices do, these strong thoughts. They make it like your life is not worth it. Give it up. Stop. Go away. Kill yourself.
Yep, that's common.
So when I got out, finally towards the last week, they decided to resort to electroconvulsive therapy, otherwise known as ECT, because nothing was working. So the very last week there, I had my first so-called shock treatment, ECT. And what they do is they give you anesthesia so that your muscles don't convulse, and they kind of shock the brain a little bit to see if they can reset things. I would have to say after the very first treatment, it worked because I knew I felt better. I felt better. I was still rock bottom, but I felt like I might stop falling. Like I was able to start rebuilding myself.
See, notice they were using energy, electrical energy, and not a chemical. So now they're moving into the realm of using energy to fight these things. And, the shock treatment a lot of times would drive out the voices for various periods of time before they would return. So there was some effect.
It stops them temporarily. It keeps them at bay temporarily. So they gave me 5 more treatments. I had 2 treatments as an inpatient at the hospital. Then I was outpatient, and I had I think I had three treatments inpatient, 3 treatments outpatient. So I had a total of 6 ECT treatments over a period of about 2 weeks, every other day. I wanted to stop after the first one because I said, look, I'm feeling a lot better. They said, no, you have to do all 5. So I went through all 5.
Oh, for crying out loud. You have to do all 5.
Yeah.
You're based on what?
I know. I mean, like I said, at the first one, I knew I was better after the first one. So I got out of the psychiatric hospital. They assigned me with a counselor and a psychiatrist to prescribe the drugs. They had me on Klonopin at the time, which I understand is a mood stabilizer. And I hated being on the Klonopin. And during this whole episode, I stay away from any recreational drugs because I knew this was something in my mind that I had to battle with myself. And I knew if I took any drugs or alcohol or touched any of that stuff, it was only going to cause me harm.
And talk some about the battle that you had with these things and the things they were telling you. I remember you said at one point, take that up with God. That's not my issue.
Yeah. So
I found that very interesting.
After I got out of the psychiatric hospital, I was going. All of a sudden, the voices they came back. It was almost like a tribunal. They started attacking, and the first attack was almost they were showing me a path to extreme wealth, power, riches instantaneously, a path to mammon, almost like offering me the world if I gave up my quest, if I gave up my mission in life. And I kept confronting them. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And I was poor. I was unemployed. I was barely paying the bills. I was trying to get on my feet, but I felt like they were offering this deal for a specific reason. They showed me how to do it. I mean, they show you a path, a certain future to go to. And I kept saying, no, I'm not doing that. I refuse to sign that Faustian bargain.
What's the path roughly?
Well, at the time, it was more like how to become rich very quickly, following certain methods, even in business, and that sort of thing.
I've heard of this before, more than once. The same thing, and there is one famous rock star, I forgot which one it was, who actually took him up on it.
It was a temptation, is what it was, and I
Yeah.
think they were doing that because they viewed me. I was a future threat I was a threat to them, or I'm a future threat to them, and they were trying to kind of steer me off a path. And as Jerry mentioned, they're beyond time. Time is not something that they dwell in unless they come into this world. But in their realm, time is not really a defined quantity. So I went through the battles of the temptation of instantaneous wealth, riches, power. Basically, if I sold my soul, is what was occurring. And the part of my mind that was watching this saying, this is madness. I mean, this is the type of thing that Jesus Christ allegedly went through. His journey through the desert, 40 days in the desert, the temptation from the devil. And I'm thinking, man, I really am mad. This is insane. I have my subconscious is kind of like telling me that I'm here to help humanity, maybe a messiah figure. I don't know. That sounds ludicrous even to myself when I say it out loud. And here I'm witnessing these events and everything. So that temptation stopped, and then they started coming after with other accusations. And it wasn't like they were just attacking me, but they were attacking all of humanity at the same time. And I was acting like a representative against them. The next attack would say things like, "Oh, you and humans, you're so worthless. Look at your bodies are horrible. You just end up rotting in the grave or being eaten by worms. You stink up if you smell bad if you don't take a bath or a shower for a while." I mean, just attacking the human form every way they could. And I stood my ground. I started defending myself, and I said, sometimes I was talking out loud when I said this stuff. Other times I was talking in my head back and forth. But I said, look, I said, you're blaming me and humanity for something we have no control of. We didn't make our bodies. It was granted or assigned to us. Take your arguments to God, not to me.
And how'd they react to that?
They backed off almost immediately.
Yeah.
It was almost like they knew they weren't going to win that argument. So then they would take a different approach. They would go into my mind and pull any little sin, and I put sin in quotes there, that I might have done. And a sin to them was like fishing. I would, if you go fishing, you'd hook up live bait onto a hook. I would hook a worm onto it to catch a fish. Oh, they made me feel so guilty for ever doing that. How could you do that? You humans, you're horrible. You kill life. How you killed that earthworm, and it made me feel guilty for that. And that was the most minor of things. And of course, it made me feel guilty for any piece of meat I ever ate. And I still deal with some of those issues today.
Yeah, anything that will generate negative emotion, they'll hit you with. You know, they can go into your mind and they can pull up any rotten thing you've ever done, because your thoughts are energetic. They're energetic. They can link up and throw them in your face and generate that negative emotion, which they feed off of. But they're draining you, so they're energetic parasites. We're not the top of the food chain on this planet.
I remember when I was in the psychiatric hospital, they kept wanting me to get out of bed. And I said, look, I'm not sleeping. I said, I'm exhausted all the time. And they kept wanting to get me up and get me moving. And I remember they tell me, look, we saw you were sleeping. I said, look, just because my eyes were closed doesn't mean I was asleep. But I remember I was exhausted a lot of times. And even after I got out of the psychiatric hospital, I was still exhausted after these attacks. So they kept attacking me for eating the meat and flesh of other animals, for killing an earthworm. And I would argue back. I said, look, God gave us teeth and taste buds. Is that our fault that we eat meat of other animals? Predators eat other predators in the animal world. Don't blame humanity for that. Blame God for that. Take your arguments to God on that one.
See, and what you're doing is critical. You're actually taking a stand against them. And that's absolutely necessary, because if you give in to them, they'll just roll you right over. You've lost. You got to stand up to them. Like you said, they're bullies. You have to stand up to them, or they'll kick your butt.
You have to be your own defense counselor when you're dealing with these entities. Now, I was in counseling at this time too. I was more focused on the codependent issues that I was having with my mother. I didn't go into all the other stuff that was going on. Like I would be asked a few times, are you having hallucinations or hearing voices? And I would always tell my counselor no, because one, I didn't want to go back in the psychiatric hospital. And two, I didn't want them putting me on any more drugs. I knew this is something that I had to fight on my own mind. And I knew if I had said Anything otherwise, they probably would have changed my prescription, increased it, or changed an entirely different drug. At least I was semi-functional with the Klonopin. I didn't want to be on something where it would just totally knock me out. So these battles kept on going for a while, where I think I felt like they were different entities coming in. You know, the one failed, the next one would come in and start their attacks, trying to get at me. They wanted me to kill myself constantly.
That generates a tremendous amount of negative emotional energy,
Yeah.
which they suck off, and that's common too.
So they're psychic vampires in every
Yes.
sense of the term.
Right. That's what they feed off of, negative emotional energy. They can't stand positive energy. So, you know, every time he mentioned God or challenged them with that, they back right off.
And this part, when I got out of college, I started reading the Bible for myself for the first time, because I've been through Sunday school and everything, but I said, you know, I want to see what this says to me when I read it. So I just started reading the Bible for the very first time. That's when a lot of this stuff started happening. Coincidence? I don't know.
No, they don't like the Bible. They hate the 23rd Psalm. It's like burning them with a blowtorch, which is interesting. Why would a hallucination react so negatively to the 23rd Psalm or the Bible?
Yeah, and just one book and one text in one book.
So there were a series of tribunals and attacks going on. But a few other ones they would do an attack me with. And this was going on probably in the summer of 1991. I was still in counseling. I was still in Klonopin. I was doing whatever odd jobs I could to earn a little bit of money. I still
just one remark I'd like to say about the Bible. Could that be why? And I'm not particularly religious. I don't belong to any religion, basically. Haven't been to church for 20 years. But basically, could that explain why there's such a war against Christianity and the Bible at the moment by the mainstream media? It's almost as if there's a war against religion by the mainstream media, even by the alternative media that seem to promote Luciferianism and everything. Is it because of those voices that seem to control not just on an individual level, but on a collective level?
Yes, exactly. Because if you look at the patterns that these voices run, they're exactly what the mainstream media is putting out on the people right now. You know, this poisoning with this vaccine that they planned out, all this negative crap that's coming over the television all the time. It's the same patterns that the voices are running on a macroscopic scale. So there's a huge spiritual war going on right now on this planet.
Oh, Paul, that question you asked, that's a topic for a whole nother interview.
Yeah, that's another deal. But yeah,
I mean, the Bible, there's a lot of it is literal, a lot of it is figurative. And the problem is, I don't think we quite separate it properly, which are figurative, which are literal occurrences, and a lot of it's symbolic too.
Well, they react to any positive spiritual material in the same way. They don't like any kind of positive spiritual material, and they will resist it and start screaming and hollering and saying this is crap. And how did the voices react when you started reading the Bible?
Well, they definitely got more intense. I mean, it was almost like they were trying to have me not do it.
Right. And why would a hallucination do that? And that's consistent too. That's consistent among hundreds of patients who've tried to read the Bible. The voice is kicked up. Why would a hallucination do that? It wouldn't.
Well, I was speaking to about a year ago. I was speaking to Paulino, and Paulino, I don't know if you've heard about him, both of you, but he's basically a paranormal researcher, and he helps people get rid of entities that are in the house that are what he calls psychic vampires, psychic parasites. And one of his methods to get rid of those entities is having evenings where he gets together with the people he's helping, and they have a meal, a tea, whatever, and they laugh and crack jokes and everything. And he's had very good results with that. He has happiness evenings, I think he calls them, something like that.
Yeah, they don't like that.
Yeah, and he's had very good results with that.
Yeah, they react very violently to people being happy or laughing. They don't like to be laughed at or mocked.
Oh yeah, they don't like joy or humor or
No,
contentment or anything like that.
no, they don't want you feeling good. They want you feeling bad.
And they definitely, their strongest attacks probably I'd say occurred between maybe 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
Because if you weren't sleeping, it would get worse, and if you were sleeping, you'd wake up and you'd have to deal with those attacks, and they would just hit you like, go kill yourself, do this, do that, and they would try and get you to do sometimes very impulsive things that you wouldn't normally do, and it was odd. I remember, like, they kept trying to get me to kill myself. One of the voices kept wanted me to do it very dramatically, to climb a high tension voltage tower and jump onto the high voltage wires to execute myself. And the other ones wanted just to do it easy, do it quickly using carbon monoxide. And there was times I was in my garage actually getting the pipes out to hook it up to my car exhaust. And I think what stopped me is I had some younger generations in my family, some nieces, and the fact that I had some compassion left in me to think of what it would do to my nieces if their uncle committed suicide. And that's probably what stopped me from going through with it. Other than the fact that I think there was something else higher up trying to help me too. So finally, I reached a point, I was exhausted from all these battles. This has been going on for most of 1991 after I got out of the psychiatric hospital. I'm thinking, I'm mad, I'm a lunatic, I'm a madman, what's going on? I didn't trust myself anymore. My whole reality and psyche had been gone. It was like my whole ego was being destroyed. My personality was being torn apart. So I started praying to God very intensely. I said, God, give me a sign this isn't madness in my head. I need some proof that this so-called life mission that I think that I'm supposed to do is real, that what I'm battling in my head is real, that this isn't something that my brain is just doing because it wants me to be on this quest or journey. So I prayed very, very heavily for God to give me a sign. It didn't matter what the sign was. I had no idea what it would be. I mean, shoot, if a priest had showed up at my door and knocked on the door to say hello, I would have accepted that. If a shipment of Bibles arrived at my door by mistake, I would have accepted that. But after 2 weeks of probably the most intense praying I ever did in my life, I woke up about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning with the feeling there was a presence in my room. And I opened my eyes, I looked up, and I saw the square ceiling light on the ceiling. I'm looking at it, and to the left of it, something started to occur. All of a sudden, I saw this like fog or smoke starting to come into the room from just below the level of the ceiling. And at first, I thought it was electrical fire, but I was like, wait a second, that's not how a fire moves. Usually, you see some browning or that sort of thing. And this was coming, and it wasn't actually coming out of the ceiling. It was actually coming out from a plane just below the ceiling. And more of the smoke or illuminated fog started to come into the room. And it wasn't stopping. I remember thinking, am I hallucinating? I closed my eyes and I shook my head back and forth to try and stop it, but it continued. And so this fog started filling up the ceiling area above my head. I'm watching it. Part of me is terrified. Part of me is curious. What is this? What's going on here? And then I see this kind of a portal open up, like an oval-shaped dark portal. It was pitch black, but it was in the middle of the cloud, and the clouds were kind of coming out of it, and the cloud and fog were around it. I'm looking at this dark portal. I can't see anything. Then all of a sudden, I see swoosh, this snake-like tail or movement moving from bottom up within the portal. And it looked like it was connected, like it was either two snake tails or a snake-like body that had two vertebrae in it, like parallel tails adjacent to each other. And it went up, and it was kind of grayish on the bottom, and it had kind of black, and it was scalish too, black scales. And I remember saying to myself, what is that? So the fog is filling up more out of this, coming out of this portal. I saw the snake-like movements, and then I see these serpentine movements within the clouds, almost like something's coming out of that portal and it's filling up the room. And then all of a sudden, this face goes across my field of vision from left to right. And it was basically from the side, it looked kind of like dog or lion-like, and the rest of his body was the serpentine tail.
Now, don't you have a drawing or picture of that thing?
Yeah, actually, I'll get to that a little bit later. So it's actually, it came into the room from left to right, and I didn't know what it was. I was like, boy, if I'm hallucinating, this is really weird. Because I mean, I didn't have any fear of snakes or anything. One of my college roommates had a boa constrictor, and I used to hold it all the time, no problem. So it wasn't some underlying fear that was coming up. So then the face turns towards me, and it looked like almost like a disabled cat or mangy lion that had been through a few fights. I remember its left eye looked like it was slightly damaged. It might even look like it was blind in its left eye. I couldn't really tell. I kept thinking, okay, is this a hallucination or is this thing really in my room? What is going on here? And all of a sudden, the face changes into the most horrible thing that I could possibly imagine. It became very ghoulish-like, hobgoblin-like, and it came down towards me from the ceiling, opening its mouth almost like to devour me. I was terrified. I mean,
well, that's very interesting. I tell you why, because there was I used to know this person who was a psychic basically, and he described that type of beings that used to affect. He used to see that being lingering above people that were either demonically possessed or victims of black magic. He used to see that above every being, and he described it like a kind of an eel, a serpentine eel with a kind of mammalian head, and that seemed to be lashing out at the people who were either demonically attacked, demonically possessed, or victims of black magic. So that's very interesting, because that person who was a psychic told me that many years ago.
So it came at me. I was terrified, frightened. I thought this was the end of my life. I thought this thing I felt like it was coming to destroy me, whatever it was. I had nothing left. I've been through these battles for months and months and months. So I only had one thing left in me, and that was love. So what I did is, okay, this is coming. You're coming to destroy me. I'm going to give you my offer of a sacrifice of love towards you. So it was projecting horror, terror, fright onto me. I just projected love onto it. I just went like that. I lowered my ego. I wasn't going to fight it. I wasn't going to confront it. I just projected love onto it.
And that's the most effective weapon he could have used. And
Yeah.
it works with all schizophrenic voices if you can do it.
All of a sudden, it pulverized or disappeared, like it just poof, like it had. I don't know if it had exploded or it had just gone or changed. And the next thing I know, there's this different face looking at me. It was like a white porcelain face, androgynous. I couldn't quite tell if it was male or female. It had kind of fluttery-like wing-like strands, golden-like strands flowing from it. And the strands looked like they were coming in and out of existence. I mean, it could be interpreted almost as angelic, the way they were flapping. But it wasn't, but I'd say the flapping is more like they were coming in and out of existence. And it was almost, I'm looking at this face and thinking, okay, the other horrible lion-like face was trying to scare me as much as possible, terrify me. What are you going to do to me now? But I almost felt like this face did not realize that I was there. Like it was almost like it was just released from a prison and trying to determine, it didn't know yet that it was free. So I'm looking at this white porcelain face, and then also it kind of moves, and it had like pupilless eyes. And all of a sudden, I felt this wave of love, joy, ecstasy, erotic bliss come from this white porcelain-like face and come back at me. It was the most invigorating feeling of joy, erotica, ecstatic feeling that I ever had. And I say erotic not in the purely physical sexual sense, but erotica in the idea of merging with another being in a metaphysical sense, in a psychic sense. And as that I was feeling that coming from it, it was a very different feeling or sensation than what I had had from the creature that came in before, the entity that came before into the room. The white porcelain face, it smiles at me. And I could actually see dimples for me as it looked at me. And I remember thinking, I'm not worthy to look at this. This is something from beyond this material world. I almost wanted to look away, but I kept looking at it. And it was sheer beauty. I mean, that's the only way I could describe it for what I was seeing. And then I had the sensation like I was rising out of my body, merging with this white porcelain entity. We were both kind of going up. And the white porcelain mask entity was going in reverse back into that portal and the cloud substance that the other entity had come out of. And I was kind of going along with it for the ride, merging with it. And just as I entered the portal, I fell back asleep. So I don't remember anything upon entering that portal. But I remember I woke up the next morning about 6 or 7 a.m. thinking, what had just happened? But I also knew that was the sign that I was looking for, because it told me that was not madness in my head. That was a genuine spiritual battle that I was undergoing. Because I was praying for a sign from God. Okay, if the classic stereotypical angel that you see in all the textbooks showed up with, the wings and the halo and the white gown, okay, that could have been made up in my head. If I saw that bearded guy called God, with the lightning bolts in his hand looking down on me, okay, I can understand that could have been something that was in my subconscious. But I'd never seen that lion dog-like face with the serpentine body before in my life. I had no point of reference to it. And after after that vision, that hallucination, the voices had started to subside, or they might have even stopped at that point, because I knew I had won. I knew that what I was going through was real. And that's when I started looking to other religious paths and doing my own research into what was occurring. And this all occurred about 1990, 1991, 1992. So in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been doing more research to try and figure out what it was that I went through. And I was working on writing a book. And I came across this image. And it's exactly what I saw that night in my room in the fall of 1991. And if for your listening audience, if they type in the words Chnubis, it's spelled Chnoubis. And just do a Google or a Bing or an internet search on that. Chnubis is actually one of the Egyptian gods going back 3 or 4 or 5,000 years ago. He's also known as the Gnostic Demiurge or Abraxas. I can actually, Paul, are you typing in right now, or I can do a share screen?
Yeah.
So I can show you.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind to see it. I've got Chnubis, and it's basically a snake's tail with a lion's head, something lion-in.
Can you share your screen to show the viewers?
I don't know if I can. Wait, I'll just try and do it.
I'll pull it up on my screen too as well while you're looking, Paul.
Can you see it?
No, my screen just went blank.
Oh, there
Okay,
it is.
there we go. There it is. What is this in the way here? There's something blocking it.
Those archons are at it again.
Actually, and there's no way to get rid of that block either. Look at that. Where did that come from?
Well, on the left-hand side, that's it.
Yeah, left-hand side. Yeah.
But you can see it. It's a twin-like snake tail. Almost looks like it has 2 vertebrae. That's what I saw. And from the side, it looks like lion or dog-like.
And you never had any exposure to this thing
I had no
before.
point of reference. I mean, I was Greek Orthodox. I was Catholic. They don't teach this stuff in a Methodist Sunday school.
Yeah, so this just came out of nowhere.
Yeah, just like that. And as I said, what's interesting, it's that type of entity was described by this psychic person who could see when people were demonically attacked. Well, that was the way he interpreted it, and people that were targeted by black magic. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, the vision that I had was authentic, true, and real. the interpretation, that's the difficult part, because there's multiple ways of interpreting it. Yes, could very well be mind parasites, what your psychic acquaintance was describing them as, energy vampires. It could have been the Abraxas, the Demiurge. No, I don't know if I was being tortured, tormented, trained, or all of the above. I don't know if I was being put through a series of tests, like initiations, very similar to what some of the Gnostics went through. And I just came upon Gnosticism within the last 2 or 3 years. I didn't know anything about it until I started doing reading. And the Gnostics talk about the Demiurge or Abraxas and Sophia or Barbelo. And some of their mythology kind of relates to this stuff. So I don't know if that white porcelain face could have been an Aeon, Sophia herself, or Barbelo, or a newer Aeon or entity. But I still have a sensation of that second entity in my life. There's been certain things that have occurred. You could also call it one's daemon in the Plato sense, your guardian angel, your higher self. There's many different ways to describe what that was. So I almost feel like the snake-like demon entity that came into the room beforehand had the other benevolent entity with the white porcelain face trapped or confined. And when I had projected love onto that lion, dog-like serpentine entity, I had released the second entity, the porcelain white face masks, from captivity. Now, I said the white porcelain face was androgynous, but I felt that it was taking on kind of a feminine nature for my sake, so to speak, so I could relate to it a little bit. But it was just sheer beauty. It was the type of thing I felt like I wasn't even worthy to look at. But that vision saved me, because it told me that what I was going through was real. It's not just made up in my head. And it gave me the foundation to start rebuilding myself as a human being. So here I am today, about 30 years later. I'm established in my profession. I've got a house, a wonderful family, a son, a dog. I'm paying the bills just well. And I haven't been on any medication, probably for schizophrenia, since at least 1991, 1992. And Klonopin was the last thing that I was on. So I think if you really want to help these patients, the idea is to have them in a safe environment to confront these voices. They need to talk to them. They need to defend themselves against them. Drugging them all up is not going to do it for the long term. Maybe as a short-term Band-Aid, but they need to be in a safe environment. I don't know if you want to bring in the shaman, bring in the priest, bring in the psychologist. I think all three of those types of people need to be there to help a person work through this. These things are real. They happen to be in a sea of thought or consciousness where they dwell, and they look for those that are either vulnerable or those that are a threat or a future threat to them. And I think what we're seeing going on in the world today has a lot to do with some of the stuff that's going on. Now, there's many names for these entities. The good ones, the benevolent ones, we could call aeons or angels, maybe cherubs, seraphat. The bad ones we could call demons, archons, vampires. Now, I don't know if they're one and the same, like two sides of the same coin, and depending on the particular target, how they react. So I don't know if I change that lion, dragon, that lion beast-like entity with a snake-like tail into something good by projecting love on it, if it changed its state of being, or I don't know if they're two separate entities. I can't conclude that. I can only put forth conjectures.
Well, these entities are separate. They run very specific patterns among hundreds of schizophrenics I've worked with. They don't like the Bible. They don't like anything positive. They don't like preachers. They're constantly telling the patient to kill themselves or hurt somebody else, because that generates the negative emotional energy that they feed off of. You know? And the vanishing of the person's energy is consistent. When the voices come and attack, the energy level just drops down to nothing. You know?
And those negative entities, they definitely they encourage their targets, or victims, I should say, they want them to commit crimes, because that generates more negative emotions. They definitely target those that are very low self-esteem or who could be a future threat to them. And their objective, it really is to take over the person's ego or personality and to control them in a manner that feeds them. And I don't know if they're eating off the negative energy or if it's like if they're addicted to it. Like it could be like a drug for them too. I'm not quite sure about that.
Well, it's a food for them, because the more they get, the stronger they get. You know, and you look at what they're trying to do. They're trying to get you thrown in prison. It's a very negative environment. You know, and you can feel it when you walk into a prison. You can just feel it. The energy changes drastically. And it's like a hell on earth. So they subject these people. I mean, that's, since they put all the mental hospitals, they put them out of business now, except for the private ones. So they either end up on the streets homeless, or they end up in prison where they're trying to feed themselves via crime, and they're made worse in there. And then when their time is up, they release them back on society in worse shape than when they went in. So what's happening is incredible. It's just, you know, prisons are they're a detriment to society. They don't help at all. Punishment does not work. That punishing stimulus has to be there all the time. Otherwise, that behavior isn't suppressed. And when they're released from the punishing stimulus, it's like the behavior goes up above baseline, stays there for a while as if to make up for lost time, and then goes right back to where it was before. You know, so the punishment-based prison system does not work, and they're investing billions of dollars into prison systems.
Now, the way to defeat these entities, their kryptonite is positive emotions.
That's right.
They can't take it. They're not used to it. I think it overloads their circuitry. So some of the positive emotions, healthy love, forgiveness, compassion, gratitude, hope, all those positive emotions destroy these entities. So that's really the way to fight the battle. Anyone going through this, it's a spiritual battle.
It is.
You're not mad. You just have to hopefully find the right guide to work you through it, be they a shaman, a priest, or a good psychiatrist, psychologist who understands this. Jungian analysts, they're aware a lot with these schizophrenic confrontations. And the voices will do anything. It's almost like they put it through a kangaroo court. They will prevent false evidence. They will tamper with it in your mind. They will try to take over. It's almost form of brainwashing, I guess, is what they're doing. And you got to stand up to them and realize that those voices, it's not you. It's something from the outside attacking you through the sea of thoughts or consciousness out there to try and get at you.
And the voices want you to believe that they are you, because that's what we've been taught since we were kids, that all thoughts that enter your head belong to you and in fact are you. But that's a lie. You know, if you're the one listening to them, you can't be them. And I've had a number of patients ask their voices, who are you? What are you? And their response was, we are you. They want you to believe that those negative thoughts that they're putting in your head are who you are.
Also, I'd say another solution or potential solution would be to basically either understand that the mainstream media and all that, it's all basically a sick satanic show, and detach from it, or turn off your TV, because the mainstream media, in my opinion, and the mainstream politics is controlled by those entities. I've spent years exposing the mainstream media. I've written books about the mainstream media, saying that basically politics, the mainstream media, it's all a show controlled by non-human entities. And even knowing that, when I put on the television, when I watch the mainstream media, you feel so low afterwards, even without being affected by those voices. And I think people that are schizophrenic, if they're exposed to the mainstream media and they're not conscious what it is, well, they'll just be in such a low state that they'll be open to more attacks by those beings.
Yeah, and you look at what the mainstream media is presenting, it's all negative. You know, it's hardly anything positive. It's all negative news that they're flooding you with.
Well, the news by default is negative, and I remember there was a news station that tried to present positive news years ago, just positive news, and it didn't work. They went out of business. They weren't getting enough sales. I think we're attracted to some of the negative stuff, not necessarily for bad reasons. I think it's to be aware, because if we're aware of certain things out there, it helps to protect us. And I don't, I have a different view on the mainstream media, because there's some stuff that's definitely propaganda-sized or is not real, but at least the mainstream media, they have more of an obligation to check their sources or the reference, who they're getting the information from, where a lot of these side news things that you might see on YouTube or that sort of thing, everybody's becoming an expert or a newscaster, regardless if they're actually double checking their references or their sources. So I think we're dealing with a mixed bag out there, and that's where it comes into play, having to use our own judgment. Okay, what do we think is true? What do we think is false? And we have to use our own discernment to figure out where this stuff is going from. And sometimes you got to turn off the TV. Sometimes just get away from it. Go for a walk. Do something different. Read a book, because heavily dosing the news, it'll definitely send somebody with schizophrenic symptoms into even worse state, because it's very negative energy.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. Also, another thing, it's also now, and that's more in the cinema, with the cinema and all that, violence and sadness, it's almost been made trivial. I mean, even when you watch cartoons, there's more and more cartoons have death, violence in them, and I'm not talking about films and all that. Now it's a culture of death, basically. So all that, it's not good for somebody that's schizophrenic, that's attacked.
It's not good for anybody.
Of course.
Yeah, and they're trying to normalize violence and pedophilia. Now they're trying to make it look like, pedophilia is a normal sexual orientation. I mean, they're putting that out now. Things that destroy kids.
That destroys their souls. By all means. It destroys
their soul.
Yeah,
right. And they're trying to normalize that.
A human being should come into their own sexuality as an adult on their own doing with their peers, not by the influence of some adult.
Right.
It's absolutely a sick system, a system of inversion. Everything's inverted.
But I guess my question, has this been going on all along, and we're just becoming aware of these things?
Oh, no, it's been going on all along. It's all boiling to the surface now, because this is a spiritual war going on planet-wide now. It's all boiling to the surface. It's been going on forever, but it's only being exposed right now.
Well, then this exposure is a good thing, because it's making us confront it and face it.
Because people are finally waking up to what's been going on. And, of course, they're trying to suppress it in every way they can.
Now, I did write a book based on some of my experiences and to help those on their spiritual path. And this is the book that I think the archons entities did not want me to write. So if my website is okay, if Paul, I just get my website out?
Of course.
Okay, so it's asteroxrising.com. That's spelled ASTEROXRISING.com, asteroxrising.com. And if the listeners want to go to that website, that explains a little bit more about the book, and it shows where you can get it. It's available in digital format or paperback. And that's just kind of what the cover looks like, Paul, in case you're interested.
Yes, I'd like to get it, because the subject's very interesting.
It's a beefy read, but I think it'll help anybody on their spiritual journey. I try to, I kind of make it a reference for my own journey, what I read and encountered. Because after I had that vision, I realized there's more to Christianity than meets the eye. And I had to go across religious boundaries to look into Buddhism, look into Islam, Hinduism, and all the other religions that are out there. And I had to kind of draw my own conclusions about what they're all about. And that's what this book kind of goes into, to help anybody on their spiritual path and deal with the good times and the bad times that we all encounter in this world.
Yeah, and we've wrote one too. It's called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. It's by Jerry Marzinski and Sherry Swiney. And you can find that on our website at jerrymarzinski.com, along with a whole lot of more information on psychosis and the voices. We have tons of extra information on there.
Well, my books are available for French-speaking readers because they're only in French. I'll try and translate them into English in the coming month. They're available on my website, au-delà-de-l'illusion.fr, and on my site, www.librairiedubonheur.com for French-speaking readers. So that's where you can get my books, and they deal basically with the non-human presence, how they manipulate us in our everyday life, and how they manipulate basically this reality. So it all ties in. I think all our work definitely ties in.
So the one of these entities, they want you to think that they don't exist.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
if they're undercover, they can get away with what they're doing.
That's right. They can get away with murder as long as you believe that they don't exist, and it's your mind that's doing this thing.
And remember, the devil shows up at your doorstep. It's just validating that God is real, because the devil wouldn't show up unless God is real. There has to be that opposite. Now, I don't know if the devil is working cahoots with God, if they're one and the same, or if they're in confrontation with each other. The various religions and mythologies out there will give different stories and different approaches to that too. But that's what each individual has to make their own determination in regards to the relationship between God and Satan, or God and the devil.
Well, there are evil spirits out there, and they belong to another dimension, and they are feeding on us.
Definitely, we are a food source for those entities, and they can manipulate our perception at every different levels, collectively, individually. That's what we've got to understand. We can't understand how this world works at an individual level or at a collective level without understanding the presence of those entities, whatever they are.
Yeah, you can't do anything about them until you realize that they're real. As long as you're believing psychiatry that these things are hallucinations, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it.
As you mentioned, there's a spiritual battle going on, and I think what's occurring is that humanity's waking up to a lot of this stuff. I mean, we're kind of revitalizing what some of the religions have been telling us for years, in regards to exorcism, evil entities, good entities, and I feel like that this is all the chaos going on in the world these days. Ukraine and this and that. It's their battle of the bulge. I think that they feel like these entities know that the war is just about lost, and they're putting out their last ditch effort here. So I have great hope in humanity once we get past some of this stuff, that we're going to enter into another golden age. It's just we're trying to get over this hump.
I agree with you. People are waking up at a level like never before.
And we have social media to thank for it. I know social media has its good and bad sides. It's shadows, but when used properly, it becomes a great communicative tool to connect with others. Like would we have been able to do this and discuss this topic 20, 30 years ago, or even realize that we had this common interest? Probably not. That's the positive side of some of the social media and the internet and what technology has brought for us.
Well, I think there is a positive side if you use it to communicate information, to talk with somebody that's far away, even to inform yourself. There's definitely a positive side. If you stay at that positive side, it can be very good. But the trouble is, a lot of people just use social media willy-nilly. I mean, we know those people that they use social media to communicate with their next door neighbor instead of going to see the next door neighbor. That's very dangerous if it's used like that. So it's really a double-edged sword.
Oh, you're absolutely correct. It's proper use of it. It's kind of like, when do you send the email? When do you pick up the phone? And when do you walk next door to talk to the person face to face? You got to use balance and judgment with that.
And trust your own intuition.
Mm.
You get a feel for information that comes across. and the information that resonates with you would be your truth.
That's it.
You look at all the stuff that the mainstream media has been saying is conspiracy theories, and now they're coming true, one after the other, after the other, after the other. All these conspiracy theories are now becoming reality with the proof behind them. And this is all stuff social media was exposing years ago. So, well, we found this, we found that, and then they'd come, oh no, our fact checkers say, no, that ain't real. It is real, time after time after time.
And oftentimes,
I think, and that's just my personal opinion, social media, as it was at first, was designed to get people hooked onto it by giving good information, and then now they've started this terrible censorship.
Yeah.
So suddenly people are also hooked onto it, and they get less and less information if they don't know where to look because of this censorship. I mean, in France, there's lots of things you can't say on YouTube and on other social medias. If not, you get censored straight away.
Well, that's why people over here are moving to other sites that aren't censored, like MeWe.com or Getter.com or Gab, where you can say whatever you want. People are going there now instead of listening to, Twitter and Facebook and some of those others that censor you. That people here resent being censored.
Yeah, that's what's good about the American mentality, because in Europe, I've lived in France and Great Britain, and people still like their slavery. It's starting to change. It's starting to change. It's a very small level, but it's starting to change. But there's less open-mindedness than there is in the US. Well, there's other advantages compared to the US, but there's less open-mindedness than there is in the US, I think.
Well, they're doing their best to stifle us over here.
Yeah, the question is, is it this consciousness of thought trying to take control? I mean, is it one individual? It's
Oh no, it's not one individual. This has been planned out for decades. You got Soros, you got the Microsoft guy. I mean, you got the pharmaceutical industry that's making billions of dollars off of selling these toxic vaccines now. I mean, we have a lot of enemies. The people have a lot of enemies out there. And the sooner they realize it, the better off they're going to be.
There's a word by indigenous Americans called Wetiko, Wetiko, and it kind of means that evil that's out there, that we don't recognize it. But once we recognize it, become aware of it, that's how we can confront it. If you don't know if it exists or you're not aware of it, you're blind to it, you can't do anything about it. But when you wake up to it, when you open your eyes to it, that's when you can do something about it.
And that's what we're trying to do here, is to wake people up to the fact that these voices are not hallucinations. This is a spiritual battle that these people are facing. And to believe that it's a chemical imbalance is going down the wrong track completely.
Oh, I heard that many times. Oh, you have a chemical imbalance.
Right.
Well,
and they have no proof.
How do you correct it? How do you correct the chemical imbalance? Oh, we'll give you a bunch of drugs and see what works.
Yeah, but it doesn't correct any kind of imbalance, and they have no test to prove that there's any kind of imbalance at all. There's not one clinical test that shows that anybody has a chemical imbalance in their brain. They don't even know what the neurotransmitter balance in the brain is, let alone that was put out by a drug company back in the I think it was the early 70s when they came out with Prozac, and they knew it was a lie then, but they went with it anyway, because it made them a lot of money. So here they are feeding us lies that, oh yeah, your depression is a chemical imbalance, your schizophrenia is a chemical imbalance, everything wrong with your mind is a chemical imbalance, and here we have these drugs that will fix it. They don't fix anything. They don't cure anything. They don't want schizophrenia cured. Matter of fact, they've withdrawn virtually all the research funds to look for a cure for schizophrenia. You know, they're not investing any energy whatsoever in finding a cure for this stuff. And what they do look at is the chemical imbalance stuff, and they keep coming up with nothing for decade after decade after decade. Nothing they have works to cure schizophrenia because they're barking up the wrong tree. This is a spiritual battle. These voices are energetic beings that are not affected by chemical drugs. It's like pouring antipsychotics on a magnetic field. It does nothing to it. They belong to a different energetic universe.
As I say, the money's in treating the symptoms, not in coming up with the cure.
That's exactly right. And that's all they're doing is treating the symptoms and drugging down the brain. And these drugs are toxic. They are not recreational drugs. You won't ever find anybody, trying to get these drugs to get high with. Nobody wants to take them. They have awful side effects. And the psychiatry is maintaining an iron grip on these drugs. They don't want anybody, especially general practitioners, prescribing these drugs. They've made themselves out as the experts in these drugs, and they're the only ones who know how to use them. And basically, they're kind of the same thing that Anon says. They start with one. If that doesn't work, they go to another. If that doesn't work, they go to another. It's just like a guessing game.
Now, if I was able to...
I've seen the side effects officially of some antidepressants. And antidepressants are supposed to make you happy. Well, one of the side effects, believe it or not,
is suicide.
Suicide, yeah.
That's right.
So it's completely an inversion again, something totally an inversion.
Right. You think that doesn't stop them? They're making their money.
I think the best cure is really to find some sort of spiritual grounding to do the work.
Yeah.
You have to find your place in this world. You have to go through some dark nights of the soul if you really want to prove and change yourself and get better. I'm living proof that schizophrenia is not a lifetime sentence. It can be overcome. I would say I probably overcame it in 1992 or 1993, and I've learned to live with it. I've been able to keep it pretty much in check. Now, I was probably one of the lucky and fortunate ones. If anybody else is out there dealing with this, I would at least do it with the right people to work your way through this in a safe environment, because confronting those entities, it can be tough sometimes. I mean, you really got to stand your ground. You're facing a prosecution, and you have to defend yourself against them.
Yeah, this is not a life sentence. I've had many clients who've recovered from schizophrenia, totally off the drugs. And that's one of the things I got in trouble with at the prison when they found out these inmates were totally recovering. That wasn't supposed to happen, and I was put under investigation for helping these guys. Practicing. What did they accuse me of? It was experimenting on prisoners without departmental approval, which I would have never got.
You were asking them questions.
I was asking them questions about their voices and then figuring out ways to interfere with those voices to break up those patterns. And when these guys started recovering and going off their meds, then they put me under investigation and were making life hell for me. They didn't want these people recovering.
You were treating them like actual human beings and talking to them? They didn't like that?
Yep, they didn't like that. They did. I was told that I was reinforcing the voices by asking questions about them and making these people worse. I was told that by 2 different psychiatrists and ordered to stop asking questions about their voices because these were hallucinations, and I was just increasing or strengthening their hallucinations by asking them questions about what their voices were doing and how they were acting. And that's the only way you know these things are energetic beings. The only way you know they exist is by the effect that they create. It's like a magnetic field or electricity. You can't see those things. All you can see is the effect that they create. And the voices create a very specific series of effects. And it's all these negative things that we have a list of them on our website. I mean, it's pages of these negative things that the voices say and the way they react. And why would they, what is it that holds them on a consistently negative path? If there wasn't some force holding them on a negative path, they would go random. They'd be all over the place. Some would be positive, some be negative, some be neutral. No, these are a consistently negative path. They always say negative stuff. They're always moving toward getting the person to believe negative stuff about themselves and others.
And a question for both of you. Would you think that the voices have an agenda that is to feed off the energy of the person until basically the person dies of energy depletion or kills themselves? Or do you think the voices have no particular agenda but just play a sick game with their victims?
No, they have an agenda and they're after that energy. There's no doubt about it. They want that energy. You talk to schizophrenics who hear these things and ask them, how do you feel before the voices come? How do you feel after the voices come? Consistently, they are drained. You know, some of them say, I can actually feel my energy leaving my body. You know, they're so drained, some of them can't even get out of bed in the morning after being attacked by these things, and that is consistent.
Well, there's definitely an agenda. I think the agenda may be, though, against all of humanity. They do not like humanity. I think we are perhaps a threat or a future threat to them. They don't want us to kind of awaken or grow as a species.
I agree.
And I don't know if we're being treated as cattle for them, where they feed off of us, because, you know, a farmer doesn't necessarily hate his cows. He may raise and graze them, where these entities seem to hate or despise us. Wouldn't you say, Jerry?
Well, yeah, you got that hatred thing, but there is a definite parallel between a farmer and his cows. I mean, the farmer puts the cow out to the pasture, he eats grass, he produces milk. The farmer brings him in, confines the cow, milks him, takes the milk, the energy, and then releases him back out again to make more milk. And that's kind of what these things do. They hit you, they drain you, they back away for a little while. You eat more food, you create more emotional energy. They come and they drain it again. You know, and they want you isolated. They don't want you around other people. They want you completely isolated where there's no interference with what they're doing. They don't like moms, they don't like dads, they don't like relatives, they don't like wives, they don't like husbands. They want you completely isolated. You can't let that happen.
Oh yeah, they definitely want you to be isolated, and they want to make you feel as worthless as possible. Like,
that's right.
No one would talk to you. No one would say anything to you.
Everybody hates you. Everybody's plotting behind your back. Everybody's saying bad stuff about you. You can't trust anybody. I mean, they're destroying all your relationships. They don't want you to have any positive relationships.
And you can make the parallel with the work of Eve Logan. Eve Logan is an American researcher, and she studied the love bite phenomenon that she links to aliens and other entities. Well, basically, whatever you call them aliens, demons, jinn, whatever, it's the same type of entity. And those entities, what they do is they target, well, she studied specifically entities that target couples, that try and separate couples.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that target groups of friends, trying to separate groups of friends.
That's exactly what they do. They want to break off all relationships, so it's only the person and the voices. You know, and then they'll try to get the person to isolate themselves, so they're by themselves with the voices, and the voices are growing stronger while they're doing that. So isolation is one of the worst things that could happen to a schizophrenic, is for them to be isolated. But they will attack their moms, their dads, anybody. The voices will get them to drive these people away because they don't want any interference.
And they seem to as well target, and more generally, workplaces. I was talking to this lady who worked for a television company, and she was saying that she had a super job, a super team, everybody got on well, and suddenly, for no reason, nobody changed or anything, the atmosphere just changed like that. People began to row, people were getting fired for no reason whatsoever. And I think in that case, it was definitely entities that were attacking that group of people because they were getting on so well, and they were having success, and it just basically the whole team just separated. Some people left, others went to other services, a lot of them rowed. So It's really a sad thing, but I'm sure entities are behind that because it's unexplainable.
Yeah, and you look at the suicide rate of schizophrenics, it's 3 to 5 times higher than the normal population. But what's interesting, if you look at the suicide rate of psychiatrists, it's virtually exactly the same rate. Psychiatrists kill themselves at 3 to 5 times higher than any other doctor, bar none. And that doesn't apply to psychologists or psych nurses or medical. It's just psychiatrists have a very high suicide rate, which is very interesting, and it's almost equivalent with their patients, their schizophrenic patients.
The thing about these entities too, they don't just work on the minds of their targets. They will actually go to people outside of their targets to have them influence the target as well.
Yeah.
Like I've encountered occurrences. I remember when I was going through these ordeals, but actually these entities would seem to be working through other people to go at me, and I had to be kind of careful about that, how I went through that. But you talk about that situation where the whole atmosphere changed. I mean, you could have a chronic presence coming into play. I mean, this is what sociopaths and psychopaths are. They're basically, I think, in a sense, kind of possessed by these archonic or demonic entities, and they become very manipulative. I mean, they brainwash, they play games, they crave power, rising to the top as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
It all correlates.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, they definitely. It's almost as if those entities are contagious.
Yeah, they try to trigger negative emotions in others for sure. It's like setting a fire. It's like setting a forest fire. The more negative energy they can generate, the more they have to feed off of.
There was another anecdote. There was this person who owned a shop, successful businessman, and he employed basically a schizophrenic person because of a program to reinsert people in society. So it was quite a good thing. But he said the moment he employed the person who was on those big pharma drugs and all that, the customers stopped coming and people were not coming to his shop, and the shop almost closed. So it's
people can feel it.
And yeah, that's it. There's something that can be felt.
Yes.
And these entities, they work by the strategy of divide and conquer, divide and conquer. That's what they're constantly doing to humanity, divide and conquer, keep us not waking up. And they're feeling threatened because we're starting to be aware of this sort of thing, and it's become more, believe it or not, it's becoming more difficult to divide us up because we're starting to communicate on these issues and what's occurring, what other people have encountered, and the fact that other people have encountered these same things, have seen these same faces and entities throughout history. That tells you something, that there's more profound going on here.
Yeah, you look at the Bible, I think, what was it? Jesus drove, there were 23 times where he threw out these evil demons out of people he encountered. But, you don't see that seems to have disappeared. It's like, oh, the rest of the Bible is fine. That's the truth. But when it comes to demons, no, that ain't truth. No, we just ignore that part. Here's a Christian society ignoring one of the most important aspects of the Bible. Just writing it off like it doesn't exist. Oh, there are no demons. You ask psychiatry. Oh, there are no demons. It's just chemical imbalance of the brain, for which they have absolutely no proof for anything they're really doing. It's basically for their own profit and control. Big time control.
And the interesting thing is these demons aren't as powerful as we think they are. The whole fact that they feel threatened by humanity and that you can overcome them means that we do have the power as individuals to deal and address these entities, be them archons or demons or evil jinn, just by standing our ground, having our own awareness, having a spiritual connection, be it to some higher benevolent power. That seems to keep these entities at bay.
And for the most part, they don't have any power of their own. They have to get it from us. They don't have any energy of their own. They have to get it from us.
Good point. Yeah, definitely. It's as if I think what it is, they don't have any conscious as such. They have a synthetic, artificial consciousness, for lack of better terms.
Well, I
And
don't know. They can be very sly. I mean, I've seen them where they were very sly. You know, if something doesn't work, they'll try something else. If that doesn't work, they'll try something else. They'll come up with some real sly lie. You know, what do you think? You know?
Well, they definitely changed their attacks with me. When one confrontation or attack wasn't getting me to do their bidding, they would come up with a different strategy. They kept changing their battle plans all the time. So Paul's onto something, though, that we have something as human beings that they do not have, and they crave that. It could be the divine light within us, that, there is an aspect of God in all of us, and they don't like that. From a Gnostic standpoint, we all have a little bit of Sophia within us, the Holy Spirit, Hakma, Shekinah, and I think that they don't have access to that. We, as human beings, we are creative. We have creativity. We can use our imagination to produce productive and benevolent things. We have the artistic capabilities. I don't think these entities have that, and I don't know if they're jealous, or I should say, I don't know if they're envious, or they're trying to pull it out of us. A lot of times I feel like they don't create originality. They copy what we do or what we have.
You know, one thing's clear is they seem to hate the human race. I mean, they seem to hate us with a passion.
They seem to want us. They seem to want to use us because we create our own reality, and they seem, through the intrusive thought phenomenon, because if it affects more or less everybody at diverse degrees, they seem to want to put those intrusive thoughts in our mind, so we create a reality that's compatible with them. So I think that if we identify the intrusive thoughts and manage to deal with them, send them love, whatever, or tell them to just go away, I think we can reclaim our creative powers and create a reality individually and collectively where those beings cannot affect us and cannot harvest our energy, because they seem to not be able to raise their vibrations, whereas we can raise our vibration. That's a personal theory. That's what I think. I don't know about you, both of you,
but yeah,
that was very well said. Very well
yes,
said.
I agree
Wholeheartedly.
It's like psychiatry and psychology, social work. They're not looking at these as thought. They're not studying thought because it doesn't exist physically. You know, nobody's ever seen a thought. Nobody's ever found a thought in anybody's brain. It's an energetic entity. It's energy. So, you know, psychiatry and psychology are looking for behavior, and they study behavior, but they're completely ignoring the soul or the energetic nature of thought. You know, as far as psychiatry is concerned, and psychology, in all the 8 years I spent in graduate school, they've never mentioned the soul. They've never mentioned, you know, people being a spiritual entity at their core. It's just behavior, because they can study and they can measure behavior, but they you know, thought or these entities, they're like will-o'-the-wisp. There is no physical anything to them. You only know them by their effect.
It's like radio waves. You can't see radio waves, but we sure know they exist, right?
Right. Same thing with ultraviolet light, X-rays, magnetism, electricity. You only know energy by the effect that it has. And these voices are an energetic being, and they have a very specific pattern of effects.
Well, I believe, like, when you look at the imaging of the brain, what do they call that when they use the machines?
MRI, I think.
Yeah, MRI. I think they're seeing the effects of thought on the brain from the higher consciousness. The brain, as I said, is like a radio receiver. So they're seeing the entrances and the exits of thought from our gray matter, so to speak, but they're not seeing the thought itself. They're just seeing where it's going into physical reality within our mind. So you see those glowing points on the MRIs, the different things. I think they're seeing the effects of the thought, but they're not seeing the thoughts themselves.
You know what? That's interesting, because recently they've done some, I think it was some electronic EKG or MRI thing, where they were studying the psychotic voices, you know, and the electrical discharges in the brain. And they found that there was the voice appeared like a split second after there was an electrical discharge. And it was like there was a correlation between that electrical discharge and the voice. It was either before or after, but there was a correlation to it. So it's almost like, you know, a caveman finds a radio receiver and it's playing music, and it goes, well, who's in there? And they open it up and they don't see anybody in there, you know, and they start picking apart the little parts in it, and oh, what happens if I remove this tube or remove this transistor? That's exactly what psychiatry is doing. You know,
it sounds like particle physics too.
Yeah. We'll take this one out and see what happens to it. You know, see if it functions right. You know, but yeah, you don't see the thoughts, or you don't see the music in the radio. It comes from outside, just like these voices. They come from outside.
It's like television.
Yeah.
Do people live in the box, or are they coming from the outside? It's the same idea, and it's a point of reference. I mean, we got a lot to learn even in these current times. And yeah, the cavemen trying to explain a jet engine or the internet back with the words of vocabulary they have then, probably impossible. And that's kind of the state that we are. We're still learning. We're still learning.
Yep.
Well, in 2004, I think there were some Russian researchers, a German and a Russian team, that discovered that our DNA was basically a receiver and transmitter of photons, of basically elemental particles. So our bodies are receivers. So it makes sense that the brain receives certain information from certain entities, receives other information from other entities, other information from the soul. It's scientific.
That is coming in on an energetic level, because we are all energy. I mean, our souls are an energetic being. It's not the mind that thinks, it's the soul that thinks. You know, it's the soul that thinks. That John Mace says it's the mind, all it does is create pictures of where you put your attention. You know, and it's your soul that does the thinking and the processing, and that actually works in clinical therapy. I mean, it's a system that actually works, and it works fast, and it works accurately, unlike regular psychotherapy. So he's on to something.
So anyway, Jerry and Anon, thank you very much for this really, really interesting interview. So is there anything both of you would like to add before we wrap things up?
Well, I just hope that this interview helps your listening audience, that people are able to find some cathartic and benefit to hearing the stories and what we have to say here.
And I'd like to point out that everybody is hit by these things, not just schizophrenics. I mean, you'll be walking down the sidewalk one day and just have this horrendous thought that just shocks you. It's something you would never do, or you even feel shameful about thinking about it. You know, it's like, where did that come from? You know, and they want you to believe that that was your thought. It doesn't belong in your mind. It shocks you. You know, they put it there to try to get that reaction. And even though you know you would never react to it, or you would never follow through on such a thought, it's still upsetting to even have it. You know, so they're hitting us all. And there's a huge spiritual battle going on right now on the planet. And this is just a microcosm of what's going on in the macrocosm.
Definitely.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry. And I will be interviewing you again in a few weeks on this topic, because it's crucial. And thank you very much, Anon, for your testimony. I think it's really something that's very inspiring, because it shows that schizophrenia and those entities are not a fatality, that we are actually stronger than them, and that it is that entity phenomenon is something that we can deal with So thank you very much for your testimony, and it would be really nice to have you also back on this show to talk about your book and your work as well. That would be really interesting.
I'd certainly be receptive to that, and it's been a pleasure being on your show, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for helping us get this information out to the world.
You're welcome, and thank you for all your good work, both of you. Well, goodbye, and speak to you all for a new episode of Au-delà de l'illusion, Beyond the Illusion. Bye bye. Goodbye, everybody. Au revoir à tout le monde. Goodbye.